3 days he watched her dig alone. On the 4th, he grabbed a shovel. By winter, she had his heart. Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day. The September sun burned hot over the endless prairie of Sage Creek Basin, painting the tall grass in shades of gold and amber. Elijah Cole leaned against the weathered fence post at the edge of his property, his calloused hands wrapped around a cup of morning coffee that had long since gone cold. For 3 days now, he had watched her. She arrived on a Tuesday, driving a rickety wagon pulled by a single mule that looked about as tired as she did. Her dress was faded blue cotton, patched at the elbows, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that hung down her back. She stopped the wagon near the creek bed, about a quarter mile from where his land ended and the unclaimed territory began. And then she started digging. Elijah had seen many things in his 34 years on this earth. He had watched storms roll across the prairie like angry giants. He had buried his father in the hard ground behind the barn. He had survived winters that killed half his herd and summers that dried up every creek for miles. But he had never seen anything quite like this woman, working alone from sunrise to sunset, carving a home into the side of a small hill. On the 4th day, his conscience finally got the better of him. He saddled his horse, a steady chestnut mare named Bess, and rode slowly across the prairie toward the woman's camp. As he approached, she straightened from her work, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her shovel remained firmly planted in the dirt, and her eyes held a mixture of wariness and determination. "Morning," Elijah said, tipping his hat. He stayed mounted, not wanting to appear threatening. "Name's Elijah Cole. I own the ranch just over that rise." "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was stronger than he expected, steady and clear. "I asked about the neighboring properties before I filed my claim. I'm on my own land, Mr. Cole." "I don't doubt it, ma'am. I wasn't coming to run you off." "Then why were you coming?" He looked at her for a long moment. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the blisters on her hands, the slight tremble in her shoulders from days of hard labor. But there was something else, too. A fierce pride that seemed to hold her upright despite everything. "Thought you might like some help," he said simply. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't need charity." "Didn't say you did, I said help. There's a difference." She studied him, and Elijah felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. Whatever she saw must have satisfied something in her, because after a long pause she nodded. "I'm Hannah. Hannah Mercer." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Mercer." "Miss," she corrected. "It's Miss Mercer." He swung down from his horse and tied Bess to the wagon wheel. Rolling up his sleeves, he picked up a second shovel that lay near her small pile of supplies. "Well then, Miss Mercer, let's build you a home." They worked in silence for the first hour, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Elijah was careful to follow her lead, digging where she directed, understanding without being told that this was her project, her dream, her future she was carving from the earth. When the sun reached its peak, Hannah called for a break. She had a small fire pit set up near her wagon and put a pot of coffee on to boil. They sat on opposite ends of a fallen log, drinking from tin cups and watching the prairie wind bend the grass like waves on an ocean. "You're probably wondering," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'm wondering a lot of things," Elijah admitted. "But I figured you'd tell me what you wanted me to know when you were ready." Hannah looked at him with something like surprise in her brown eyes. "Most people don't have that kind of patience. Most people haven't spent 20 years working a ranch. You learn to wait for things out here. Seeds don't grow faster just because you want them to." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first he'd seen from her. "I was a schoolteacher in Missouri. For 6 years, I taught other people's children how to read and write and do their sums. I lived in a boarding house and ate meals I didn't cook and slept in a room I didn't own." She paused, staring into her coffee cup as if searching for words at the bottom. My father died when I was young. My mother passed 2 years ago. I don't have any brothers or sisters. I saved every penny I earned for years, and when I finally had enough, I came west. I wanted something that belonged to me, something I built with my own hands, something no one could take away. Elijah nodded slowly. He understood that kind of longing better than she could know. This land will test you, he said honestly. The winters are hard. The summers are harder. Nearest town is 12 miles, and the road washes out come spring. I know. You'll need a proper roof before the first snow. The dugout will keep you warm, but you'll need supplies, firewood, food stores. I know that too. He turned to look at her directly. I'm not trying to scare you off, Miss Mercer. I'm just making sure you understand what you're facing. I understand, Mr. Cole. I've been planning this for a very long time. I didn't come here to fail. There was steel in her voice, the kind that gets forged in the fire of loss and loneliness and years of dreaming for something more. Elijah recognized it because he heard the same steel in his own voice sometimes, late at night when the memories came calling. Then let's get back to work, he said. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Each morning, Elijah would finish his ranch chores early and ride over to Hannah's claim. Together they dug deeper into the hillside, shaping walls from the packed earth, laying the foundation for a front wall of sod bricks. Hannah proved to be a quick learner and a tireless worker, and Elijah found himself looking forward to their time together with an eagerness he hadn't felt in years. They talked while they worked, sharing pieces of themselves between shovelfuls of dirt. Hannah told him about the books she loved, the students she missed, the small apartment in St. Louis where her mother had spent her final days. Elijah told her about the ranch, about the father who had taught him everything he knew, about the dreams he had for the future and the quiet loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long winter nights. One afternoon, while they were laying sod bricks for the front wall, Hannah asked the question he had been waiting for. Why, aren't you married, Mr. Cole? Elijah set down the brick he was holding and wiped his hands on his pants. Almost was. Once. Girl named Emmeline from town. We were engaged for 3 months. What happened? She decided she didn't want this life. The isolation, the hard work, the uncertainty. She married a shopkeeper from the city instead. Last I heard, they have 4 children and a nice house with a white fence. Do you regret it? He considered the question carefully before answering. I regret that she wasn't honest with me sooner. I regret the time I spent planning for a future that wasn't going to happen. But I don't regret that she left. If she didn't want this life, really want it, she would have been miserable. And so would I. Hannah was quiet for a moment. My mother always said that a life built on pretending is no life at all. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Hannah's voice softened with memory. She used to say that the right person won't ask you to be something you're not. They'll love you for exactly who you are, thorns and all. Their eyes met across the half-built wall, and something passed between them, wordless and warm. Elijah felt his heart shift in his chest, opening like a door that had been closed for far too long. But he said nothing. Not yet. Some things, like seeds, need time to grow. October arrived with cooler nights and shorter days. The dugout was taking shape beautifully, with solid walls, a proper door frame, and the beginnings of a roof made from poles covered with prairie grass and sod. Hannah's small pile of supplies had grown, thanks to a trip to town where she purchased essentials for the coming winter. Elijah had introduced her to his ranch hands, a pair of brothers named Will and Jesse who treated her with friendly respect. He had shown her his property, the sturdy ranch house his grandfather had built, the barn where he kept his horses, the acres of grazing land that stretched to the horizon. And slowly, carefully, they had begun to build something else between them. Something that lived in the stolen glances, the accidental touches, the way they seemed to understand each other without words. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, they sat on the roof of the dugout, looking out at the vast prairie. Hannah had her knees pulled up to her chest, and the evening breeze played with loose strands of her hair. "It's almost finished," she said softly. "It is." Elijah's voice was heavy with something he couldn't quite name. "You did it, Miss Mercer. You built yourself a home." She turned to look at him, and in the fading light, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. It would have taken longer, but you would have done it. You're the strongest person I've ever met." A tear slipped down her cheek, and before he could think better of it, Elijah reached out and gently brushed it away with his thumb. His hand lingered on her cheek, and she leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "Elijah," she whispered. "Hannah." He said her first name for the first time, and it felt like a prayer on his lips. "I need to tell you something. Then tell me." He took a deep breath, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. "I've spent so long being alone. I told myself I was content with it, that I had my ranch and my work and that was enough. But these past weeks with you, I've realized that I was just afraid to hope for something more, afraid to love someone and have them leave." Hannah reached up and placed her hand over his, pressing it more firmly against her cheek. "I'm not going anywhere, Elijah. This is my home now. This land, this place, this life I'm building. I'm not going to run from it. And what about me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "What am I in this life you're building?" She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "You're the part I wasn't expecting, the part I didn't plan for, the part that makes everything else make sense." Elijah felt something break loose inside him, some wall he hadn't even known he'd built crumbling to dust. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of earth and prairie grass and something uniquely her. "I love you, Hannah Mercer. I know it hasn't been long, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. I love you too." Her words were simple, certain, true. "I came here looking for a home, and I found something so much more." When their lips finally met, the kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting them in twilight, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song. Winter came early that year, with snow falling thick and fast in early November. But Hannah was ready. Her dugout was warm and snug, her supplies were plentiful, and every few days, despite the weather, Elijah would ride over to check on her. On Christmas Eve, he arrived. Ed, with a special gift, a small wooden box he had carved himself. Inside was a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. "It's not fancy," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but it's real, just like us." Hannah held the ring up to the candlelight, watching it gleam. "Are you asking me to marry you, Elijah Cole?" "I am. I know we could wait until spring, do things properly with a big wedding in town. But I don't want to wait. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine. I want to fall asleep every night with you beside me. I want to build a life with you, not just a dugout or a ranch, but a real life, full of love and laughter and everything in between." Hannah slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Yes," she said, "yes, I'll marry you." They were wed on New Year's Day in the small church in town, with Will and Jesse as witnesses and the whole community gathered to celebrate. The preacher spoke of love and commitment, of building a life on a foundation of faith and trust. When Elijah kissed his bride, there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation. That spring, they began building an addition to the dugout, and the following year, they started work on a proper house on the ridge overlooking both their properties. Hannah continued to teach, opening a small school for the children of the growing community, while Elijah expanded his ranch with her help. And through it all, they loved each other fiercely and completely, two people who had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for. Years later, when their hair had turned gray and their grandchildren played in the yard of the house they had built together, Hannah would sometimes walk down to the old dugout, now used for storage, and run her hands along the walls. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah would ask, appearing at her side as he always did. "I'm thinking about the day you first rode up on that horse of yours, offering to help a stranger dig a hole in the ground. Best decision I ever made." Hannah would lean into him, feeling his strong arms wrap around her, and smile. "You know what I think? I think God knew exactly what he was doing when he put that wagon on that road that led me here." "I think you're right," Elijah would say, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "I think you're absolutely right." And as the sun set over Sage Creek Basin, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, they would walk hand in hand back to the house they had built together, two hearts that had found their home in each other.